Yeah, I'm Desalegn Chala from Natural History Museum, University of Oslo. I have a background of ecology, and currently I'm working in the crop-wide relatives use case in Biodiversity Digital Twin.
And I'm Dag Endresen. I'm also at the University of Oslo, the Natural History Museum, in the same group. I have a background also from crop-wild relatives and genetic resources, and I even worked on it on my PhD.
Our use case is related to crop-wide relatives, and especially the application of digital twin, biodiversity digital twin in crop-wide relative. And that means it is related to food security. And the issue of food security is on top of a global agenda. And we think that food security is threatened by three factors. The first one is exponential growth of human population. The second one is environmental stresses, which are directly or indirectly related to climate crisis. And the third one is homogenization of domesticated crops, and because of that they have lost the much needed genetic diversity to cope with these challenges. And we think that novel genetic diversity is found in crop-wide relatives or wild plants which are related to our crops, and they make about 21% of the world flora, so it's a huge resource out there. They have been in nature since the time of their evolution. They have been through several environmental stresses, and because of that they have got a lot of genes which have got adaptive values. So our aim is more of creating a digital twin prototype which facilitates the search for this novel genetic resource so that we can tackle the challenges we are currently facing to feed the world population.
And work that we're doing is closely aligned and building further on a sequence of EU-funded projects. We started already 20 years ago with the PGR Forum, EU-funded on the fifth framework, to define the scope of what is the crop-wide relative and actually coining the term itself, progressing to PGR Secure, where we started to work at conservation methodology, into Farmer's Pride, which finished 21, starting to work at genetic reserves and conservation and some of the models that we'll implement in the Twin. And there's a new project started this year, Progress, that we'll also work closely together with to start to implement these EU-funded policies and methodologies.
Yeah, we think about at least 4 groups of end users. The first one is plant breeders. The second one is academicians, researchers, especially who are dealing with ecophysiology of plants. And then the third one is policymakers, because it's also about conserving this vital resource. And finally, the public at large will benefit out of this. And we think we have a lot of end users and huge variety of end users.
And if we go a bit more into detail, the private companies, the plant breeding companies, they need help to mobilize the genetic resources in the crop-wild relatives because they are of not the same seed shattering, they are undomesticated, and private sector will then work with researchers in private-public partnerships to be able to access, to pre-breed the crop-wide relatives to make the genes available in a more domesticated background so that it's available for plant breeding. So this is an important step, and the actual real users of the twin will be these people working in pre-breeding and partnership with the private sector. And when we dive in further into prioritizing conservation, there will also be a service from the Twin which will advise. And we have, for example, started to establish genetic reserves in Oslo, in Norway, in England and Spain and Portugal, which are already target end users that will aim to give more up-to-date, real-time data on conservation priorities. and status of the crop wild relative populations in the genetic reserves.
One, our use case is not restricted by traits. It can be applicable for searching for gene that can enhance adaptability to drought stress, heat shock. It can be adaptation, resistance to different kind of diseases. So it is so flexible. The second thing is we are not also aiming to restrict it by crops. It should be transferable across crops. The third thing is we are not going to restrict it by geographic boundaries. We want it to work at global scale, at the same time enabling to downscaling at local levels. And above all, we think that it extends beyond the specified use case. For example, we can use it it can be applicable in the space of policy concerns, for example, in conserving endangered species and so on. So if we can really implement what we are aspiring, then we think that it is really a good use case to showcase about biodiversity digital twin.
And the methodologies we use are already widely used in the sector, and will, as Desalegn said, make sure that the twin is working based on our use case crop, but we'll already, hopefully in November, start to call in the community to test the twin for other crops and make sure that it also scales up to other regions and it should, because it's models that are already in wide use.
Currently, we want to showcase this by using grass pea. And the grass pea is it is a legume. It fixes nitrogen. That means it adds nitrogen fertilizer to soil, because other crops cannot do that, other plants cannot do that, only legumes can do that. So it's a fertilizer. Because of that, it can grow on degraded soil. And at the same time, only residual moisture is enough for it to grow in the complete life cycle. So when all other crops are failing because of droughts, you can sow grass pea on the same farm and still you can get the product. But the challenge is it is presenting a kind of fascinating paradox. That is, it has got a neurotoxin chemical, which is causing permanent paralysis of the lower limbs and also brain damage in the children when it's consumed for a long period of time.
And to a large proportion of the diet.
Large proportion of the diet. And then this, it's called, scientifically it's called Latrus sativus. And in the same genus we have got more than 80 wild species. 80 wild species, and almost all of them are herbs. That means easy to experiment with. So we are thinking of looking genes which can enable us to reduce this toxicity from these 180 species, and from those one, at least we have enough data for 86 of them, for example, to run distribution modeling. So that means there is a huge resource out there. So currently we are working on that one, on how to use these wild relatives to reduce the toxicity to reasonable level so that we can use it as climate smart crop in the future. It is also nutritionally really very rich, especially it's really rich in protein, because of that it can tackle the protein malnutrition in the future. So that's what we are working on to showcase, but as we have already said, it should be transferable across other crops also and other traits as well, not only about toxicity.
And if we can reduce the toxicity, we can make humus and make it a staple crop, rich in proteins, and so, and it's already a lot of breeding happening on the crop for decades, looking for lower toxicity. So we hope that we could help that to progress. But it's a showcase to demonstrate the capability of the twin. So it's not an end point in itself.
Exponential exponential growth of human population, and I think we used to be only 1 billion since the last 200 years, and the human population exponentially increased to 7 to 8 billion, which is like 700 to 800% compared to the number we have achieved since the time of our evolution. There is another thing which is really exponentially growing. That is data. Probably if you compare the amount of data we have produced the last 5 years, it may be more than the amount of data we have produced since the time of human evolution. And we have a lot of data out there. And just to take some example in their application, for example, we have satellites which are orbiting the Earth, having different revisiting time and having different spectral resolutions. And we can access these satellite images. And we can automate to download cloud-free satellite images, process, and then inform us about like what's happening to restoration sites, what's happening to afforestation programs, what's happening to state farms. It can enable us even to detect the health of crops, and it has got several indexes. Second, we have a lot of hyperspectral images which have got detailed spectral information, which can be obtained by handheld tools, by flying drones, by flying planes, and they can enable us identify a species even at, plants at species level and sometimes even at population level. And for example, we can follow about invasive species, we can monitor invasive species by using this kind of data, and it has several applications beyond that. And we have camera trap data, which is really enabling identifying animals at a species level, and a lot of data is coming from camera traps from across the globe. And we can use sound data, acoustic data. The sound data enable you identify animals at a species level, from insects all the way up to mammals. And a lot of data is out there. And then at the same time, you can also come to genetics, for example. We are producing a lot of genetic data. Just think of like a tool which is automatically accessing genetic data within a certain time interval, run phylogenetic trees, and giving you an alert what's happening to the tree of life, what's happening to phylocodes. And so like you can think of, for example, a tool which is accessing genetic data of viruses like SARS and so on, which is really detecting like what kind of changes in the genetic makeup is happening and whether that lead to resistance to vaccine and so on. It can inform you earlier so that you can make an intervention. So what I want to say that there is a huge opportunity for that. And I personally think that it is a kind of emerging field, an emerging field which can potentially revolutionize knowledge production in life science. So I think it's all about like effectively implementing, and especially as a pioneers, if we can start it right, we can motivate researchers and we can motivate end users, we can motivate data producers so that they can share data. And so in such a way, I think it is a kind of cutting edge, advancing science, which has a huge opportunity in knowledge production and in informing decision making, I personally think.
And in addition to producing more data and the capacity of analyzing it, I think also the project BioDT is very important. We have a work package on fair data and the principles, and there's a lot of different standards in the different communities, and we are merging them, making them interoperable. And I think this is quite on the spearhead of development of interoperability and actually achieving fair maturity for the data sets and enabling researchers to reuse other researchers' data, but also connecting it to policy decisions. So the EU Green Deal will be able to actually utilize research data for real policies on the ground. And local government, even in Oslo, will benefit from our homogenizing of distributed data sets, heterogeneous data sets that will be able to be consumed together.